Well, good morning, everybody, and happy Monday. Hope you had a great weekend and are looking forward to day 7 of Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Let's go ahead and get started. By the end of class, Harry, like everyone else, was sweaty, aching, and covered in earth. Everyone traipsed back to the castle for a quick wash, and then the Gryffindors hurried off to Transfiguration. Professor McGonagall's class were always hard work, but today was especially difficult. Everything Harry had learned last year seemed to have leaked out of his head during the summer. He was supposed to be turning a beetle into a button, but all he managed to do was give his beetle a lot of exercise, and it scuttled over the desktop, avoiding his wand. Ron was having far worse problems. He had patched up his wand with some borrowed spellotape, but it seemed to be damaged beyond repair. It kept crackling and sparking at odd moments, and every time Ron tried to transfigure his beetle, it engulfed him in a thick gray smoke that smelled of rotten eggs. Unable to see what he was doing, Ron accidentally squashed his beetle with his elbow and had to ask Professor McGonagall for a new one. She was not pleased. Harry was relieved to hear the lunch bell. His brain felt like a wrung sponge. Everyone filed out of the classroom except him and Ron, who was whacking his wand furiously on the desk. Stupid, useless thing! Write home for another one, Harry suggested as the wand let off a volley of bangs like a firecracker. Oh, yeah, and get another howler back, said Ron, stuffing the now hissing wand into his bag. It's your fault your wand got snapped. They went down to lunch, where Ron's mood was not improved by Hermione showing them the handful of perfect coat buttons she had produced in Transfiguration. What have we got this afternoon? Said Harry, hastily changing the subject. Defense against the dark arts, said Hermione at once. Why? Demanded Ron, seizing her schedule. Why have you outlined all Lockhart's lessons in little hearts? Hermione snatched the schedule back, blushing furiously. They finished lunch and went outside into the overcast courtyard. Hermione sat down on a stone step and buried her nose in Voyages with Vampires again. Harry and Ron stood talking about Quidditch for several minutes before Harry became aware that he was closely being watched. Looking up, he saw the very small, mousy-haired boy he'd seen trying on the Sorting Hat last night, staring at Harry as though transfixed. He was clutching what looked like an ordinary Muggle camera. And in that moment, Harry looked at him. He went bright red. "All right, Harry, I'm Colin Creevey," he said breathlessly, taking a tentative step forward. "I'm in Gryffindor, too. Do you think it would be all right if I can have a picture?" he said, raising the camera hopefully. "A picture?" Harry repeated blankly. "So I can prove I've met you," said Colin Creevey eagerly, edging further forward. "I know all about you. Everyone's told me. About how you survived when you know who tried to kill you, and how he disappeared and everything, and how you've still got a lightning scar on your forehead." His eyes raked Harry's hairline. "And a boy in my dormitory said if I develop the film and the right potion, the pictures'll move." Colin drew a great shuddering breath of excitement and said, "It's amazing here, isn't it? I never knew all the odd stuff I could do was magic till I got the letter from Hogwarts. My dad's a milkman. He couldn't believe it either, so I'm taking loads of pictures to send home to him. And it'd be really good if I had one of you." He looked imploringly at Harry. "Maybe your friend could take it and I could stand next to you, and then you could sign it?" "Signed photos? You're giving out signed photos, Potter?" Loud and scathing, Draco Malfoy's voice echoed around the courtyard. He had stopped right behind Colin, flanked, as he always was at Hogwarts, by his large and thuggish cronies, Crabbe and Goyle. "Everyone line up," Malfoy roared to the crowd. "Harry Potter's giving out signed photos." "No, I'm not," said Harry angrily, his fist clenched. "Shut up, Malfoy." "You're just jealous," piped up Colin, whose entire body was about as thick as Crabbe's neck. "Jealous," said Malfoy, who didn't need to shout any more. Half the courtyard was listening in. "Of what? I don't want a foul scar right across my head, thanks. I don't think getting your head cut open makes you that special myself." Crabbe and Goyle were sniggering stupidly. "Eat slugs," Malfoy said Ron angrily. Crabbe stopped laughing and started rubbing his knuckles in a menacing way. "Be careful, Weasley," sneered Malfoy. "You don't want to start any trouble. Your mummy'll have to come and take you away from school." He put on a shrill, piercing voice. "If you put another toe out of line." A knot of Slytherin fifth years nearby laughed loudly at this. "Weasley would like a signed photo, Potter," smirked Malfoy. "It'd be worth more than his family's whole house." Ron ripped out his spellotape wand, but Hermione shut Voyages with a Vampire with a snap and whispered, "Look out!" "What's all this? What's all this?" Gilderoy Lockhart was striding towards them, his turquoise robe swirling behind him. "Who's giving out signed photos?" Harry started to speak, but he was cut short as Lockhart flung his arm around his shoulders and thundered jovially, "Shouldn't have asked. We meet again, Harry." Pinned to Lockhart's side and burning with humiliation, Harry saw Malfoy slide, smirking, back into the crowd. "Come on, then, Mr. Creevey," said Lockhart, beaming at Colin. "A double portrait. You can't do better than that, and we'll both sign it for you." Colin fumbled for his camera and took the picture as the bell rang behind them, signaling the start of afternoon classes. "Off you go, move along there," Lockhart called along to the crowd, and he set off back to the castle with Harry, who was wishing he knew a vanishing spell, still clasped to his side. "A word to the wise, Harry," said Lockhart paternally as they entered the building through the side door. "I covered up for you back there with young Creevey. If he was photographing me, too, your schoolmates won't think you're setting yourself up so much." Deaf to Harry's stammers, Lockhart swept him down a corridor lined with staring students and up a staircase. "Let me just say that handing out signed photos at this stage of your career isn't sensible. It's a tad big-headed, Harry, to be frank. There may well come a time when you, like me, you'll need to keep a stack handy wherever you go." But he gave a little chortle. "I don't think you're quite there yet." They had reached Lockhart's classroom, and he let Harry go at last. Harry yanked his robe straight and headed for a seat in the very back of class, where he busied himself with piling all 7 of Lockhart's books in front of him, so that he could avoid looking at the real thing. The rest of the class came clattering in, and Ron and Hermione sat down on either side of Harry. "You could have fried an egg on your face," said Ron. "You better hope Creevey doesn't meet Ginny, or they'll be starting a Harry Potter fan club." "Shut up," snapped Harry. The last thing he needed was for Lockhart to hear the phrase Harry Potter fan club. When the whole class was seated, Lockhart cleared his throat loudly and silence fell. He reached forward, picked up Neville Longbottom's copy of Travel with Trolls, and held it up to show his own winking portrait on the front. "Me," he said, pointing at it and winking as well. "Gilderoy Lockhart, Order of Merlin, 3rd class, honorary member of the Dark Force Defense League, and 5-time winner of Witch Weekly's Most Charming Smile Award. But I don't talk about that. I didn't get rid of the abandoned banshee by smiling at her." He waited for them to laugh, and a few people smiled weakly. "I see you've all bought a complete set of my books. Well done. I thought we'd start today with a little quiz. Nothing to worry about. Just check how well you've read them, how much you've taken in." When he handed out the test papers, he returned to the front of the class and said, "You have 30 minutes. Start now." Harry looked down at his paper and read, "What is Gilderoy Lockhart's favorite color? What is Gilderoy Lockhart's secret ambition? What, in your opinion, is Gilderoy Lockhart's greatest achievement to date?" On and on it went, over 3 sides of the paper, right down to 54. When is Gilderoy Lockhart's birthday, and what would his ideal gift be? Half an hour later, Lockhart collected the papers and rifled through them in front of class. "Tut, tut! Hardly any of you remember that my favorite color is lilac. I say so in Year with the Yeti, and a few of you need to read Wanderings with Werewolves more carefully. I clearly state in Chapter 12 that my ideal birthday gift would be harmony between all magic and non-magic peoples, though I wouldn't say no to a large bottle of Ogden's Fold fire whiskey." He gave them another roguish wink. Ron was now staring at Lockhart with an expression of disbelief on his face. Seamus Finnegan and Dean Thomas, who were sitting in front, were shaking with silent laughter. Hermione, on the other hand, was listening to Lockhart with rapt attention, and gave a start when he mentioned her name. "But Miss Hermione Granger knew my secret ambition is to rid the world of all evil, and market my own range of hair care potions. Good girl, in fact." He flipped her paper over. "Full marks. Where is Miss Hermione Granger?" Hermione raised a trembling hand. "Excellent," beamed Lockhart. "Quite excellent. Take 10 points for Gryffindor, and so to business." He bent down behind his desk and listed a large covered cage onto it. "Now, be warned, it is my job to arm you against the foulest creatures known to wizard kind. You may find yourself facing your worst fears in this room. Know that no harm can befall you whilst I am here. All I ask is that you remain calm." In spite of himself, Harry leaned around his pile of books for a better look at the cage. Lockhart placed a hand on the cover. Dean and Seamus had stopped laughing now. Neville was cowering in his front row seat. I must ask you not to scream, said Lockhart in a low voice. It might provoke them. As the whole class held its breath, Lockhart whipped off the cover. Yes, he said dramatically, freshly caught Cornish pixies. Seamus Finnegan couldn't control himself. He let out a snort of laughter that even Lockhart couldn't mistake for a scream of terror. Yes, he smiled at Seamus. Well, they're not very dangerous, are they? Seamus choked. Don't be so sure, said Lockhart, waggling a finger annoyingly at Seamus. Devilish tricky little blighters they can be. The pixies were electric blue and about 8 inches high, with pointed faces and voices so shrill it was like listening to a lot of budgies arguing. The moment the cover had been removed, they had started jabbering and rocketing around, rattling the bars and making bizarre faces at the people near them. Right then, Lockhart said loudly, let's see what you make of them. And he opened the cage. It was pandemonium. The pixies shot in every direction like rockets. Two of them seized Neville by the ears and lifted him into the air. Several shot straight through the window, showering the back row with broken glass. The rest proceeded to wreck the classroom more effectively than a rampaging rhino. They grabbed ink bottles and sprayed the class with them, shredded books and papers, tore pictures from the walls, upended the wastebasket, grabbed bags and books, and threw them out of the smashed window. Within minutes, half the class was sheltering under desks, and Neville was swinging from the iron chandelier in the ceiling. Come on now, round them up, round them up. They're only pixies, Lockhart shouted. He rolled up his sleeves, brandished his wand, and bellowed, Pescopinski, Pesteromi. It had absolutely no effect. One of the pixies seized his wand and threw it out of the window. Lockhart gulped and dived under his own desk, narrowly avoiding being squashed by Neville, who fell a second later as the chandelier gave way. The bell rang, and there was a mad rush towards the exit. In the relative calm that followed, Lockhart straightened up, caught sight of Harry, Ron, and Hermione, who were almost at the door, and said, Well, I'll ask you three to just nip the rest of them back into their cage. He swept past them and shut the door quickly behind them. Can you believe him? Ron said as he roared about the remaining pixies as they bit him painfully on the ear. He just wants to give us some hands-on experience, said Hermione, immobilizing two pixies at once with a clever freezing charm and stuffing them back into their cage. Hands-on, said Harry, who was trying to grab a pixie, dancing out of reach with his tongue out. Hermione, he didn't have a clue what he was doing. Rubbish, said Hermione. If you read all his books, look at those amazing things he said he's done. He says he's done, Ron muttered. Harry spent a lot of time over the next few days dodging out of sight whenever Gilderoy Lockhart came down a corridor. Harder to avoid was Colin Creevey, who seemed to have memorized Harry's schedule. Nothing seemed to give Colin a bigger thrill than to say, All right, Harry, 6 or 7 times a day. Hello, Colin, was however exasperated Harry sounded when he said it back. Hedwig was still angry with Harry about the disastrous car journey, and Ron's wand was still malfunctioning, surpassing itself on Friday morning by shooting out of Ron's hand in charms and hitting tiny old Professor Flitwick squarely between the eyes, creating a large, throbbing green boil where it had struck. So with one thing and another, Harry was quite glad to reach the weekend. He, Ron, and Hermione were planning to visit Hagrid on Saturday morning. Harry, however, was shaken awake several hours earlier than he would have liked by Oliver Wood, captain of the Gryffindor Quidditch team. What's the matter? Said Harry groggily. Quidditch practice, said Wood. Come on. Harry squinted at the window. There was a thin mist hanging across the pink and gold sky. Now that he was awake, he couldn't understand how he could have slept through the racket the birds were making. Oliver, Harry croaked, it's the crack of dawn. Exactly, said Wood. He was a tall and burly 60er, and at the moment his eyes were gleaming with crazed enthusiasm. It's part of our new training program. Come on, grab your broom and let's go, said Wood heartily. None of the other teams have started training yet. We're going to be the first off the mark this year. Yawning and shivering slightly, Harry climbed out of bed and tried to find his Quidditch robes. Good man, said Wood. Meet you on the field in 15 minutes. When he'd found his Scarlet Team robes and pulled on his cloak for warmth, Harry scribbled a note to Ron explaining where he'd gone and went down the spiral staircase to the common room, his Nimbus 2000 on his shoulder. He had just reached the portrait hole when there was a clatter behind him and Colin Creevey came dashing down the spiral staircase, his camera swinging madly around his neck and something clutched in his hand. I heard someone saying your name on the stairs, Harry. Look what I've got here. I've had it developed. I wanted to show you. Harry looked bemusedly at the photograph Colin was brandishing under his nose. A moving black and white Lockhart was tugging hard on an arm Harry recognized as his own. He was pleased to see that his photographic self was putting up a good fight and refusing to be dragged into view. As Harry watched, Lockhart gave up and slumped, panting against the white edge of the picture. "Will you sign it?" said Colin eagerly. "No," said Harry flatly, glancing around to check that the room was really deserted. Sorry, Colin, I'm in a hurry. Quidditch practice." He climbed through the porthole. "Oh, wow, wait for me. I've never watched a Quidditch game before." Colin scrambled through the hole after him. "It'll be really boring," Harry said quickly. But Colin ignored him, his face shining with excitement. "You were the youngest house player in over 100 years, weren't you, Harry, weren't you?" said Colin, trotting alongside him. "You must be brilliant. I've never flown. Is it easy? Is that your own broom? Is that the best one there is?" Harry didn't know how to get rid of him. It was like having an extremely talkative shadow. "I don't really understand Quidditch," said Colin breathlessly. "Is it true there are 4 balls, and 2 of them fly around trying to knock people off their brooms?" "Yes," said Harry heavily, resigned to explain the complicated rules of Quidditch. "They're called bludgers. There are 2 beaters on each team who carry clubs to beat the bludgers away from their side. Fred and George Weasley are the Gryffindor beaters." "And what are the other balls for?" Colin asked, tripping down a couple of steps because he was gazing open-mouthed at Harry. "Well, the quaffle, that's the biggest red one. It's the one that scores goals. 3 chasers on each team throw the quaffle to each other and try to get it through the goalpost at the end of the pitch, and 3 long poles with hoops on the end." "And the 4th ball?" "It's the golden snitch," said Harry. "It's very small, very fast, and difficult to catch. But that's what the seeker's got to do, because a game of Quidditch doesn't end until the snitch has been caught, and whichever team's seeker gets the snitch earns his team an extra 150 points. "And you're the Gryffindor seeker, aren't you?" said Colin in awe. "Yes," said Harry, as they left the castle and started across the dew-drenched grass. "And there's the keeper, too. He guards the goalpost. That's it, really." But Colin didn't stop questioning Harry all the way down the sloping lawns to the Quidditch field, and Harry only shook him off when he reached the changing rooms. Colin called after him in a piping voice, "I'll go and get a good seat, Harry," and he hurried off to the stands. The rest of the Gryffindor team were already in the changing room. Wood was the only person who looked truly awake. Fred and George Weasley were sitting, puffy-eyed and tousle-haired, next to fourth-year Alicia Spinnet, who seemed to be nodding off against the wall behind her. Her fellow chasers, Katie Bell and Angelina Johnson, were yawning side by side opposite them. "There you are, Harry. What helped you?" said Wood briskly. "Now, I want a quick talk with all of you before we actually get onto the field, because I spent the summer devising a whole new training program, which I really think will make the difference." Wood was holding up a large diagram of a Quidditch field, on which were drawn many lines, arrows, and crosses in different colored inks. He took out his wand, tapped the board, and the arrows began to wiggle over the diagram like caterpillars. As Wood launched into a speech about his new tactics, Fred Weasley's head drooped right onto Alicia Spinnet's shoulder, and he began to snore. The first board took nearly 20 minutes to explain, but there was another board under that, and a third one under that. Harry sank into a stupor as Wood droned on and on. "So," said Wood, at long last, jerking Harry from a wistful fantasy about what he could be eating for breakfast at this very moment up at the castle. "Is that clear? Any questions?" "I've got a question, Oliver," said George, who had woken with a start. "Why couldn't you have told us all yesterday when we were awake?" Wood wasn't pleased. "Now listen here, you lot," he said, glowering at them all. "We should have won the Quidditch Cup last year. We were easily the best team, but unfortunately, owing to circumstances beyond our control." Harry shifted guiltily in his seat. He had been unconscious in the hospital wing for the final match the previous year, meaning the Gryffindor had been a player short and suffered their worst defeat in 300 years. Wood took a moment to regain control of himself. Their last defeat was clearly still torturing him. "So this year we train harder than ever before. Okay, let's put our new theories into practice," Wood shouted, seizing his broomstick and leading the way out of the locker room. Stiff-legged and still yawning, his team followed. They had been in the locker room so long that the sun was up completely now, although remnants of the mist hung over the grass in the stadium. As Harry walked onto the field, he saw Ron and Hermione sit in the stands. "Aren't you finished yet?" called Ron incredulously. "Haven't even started," said Harry, looking jealously at the toast and marmalade Ron and Hermione had brought out of the great hall. "Wood's been teaching us new moves." He mounted his broomstick and kicked off at the ground, soaring up into the air. The cool morning air whipped at his face, waking him far more effectively than Wood's long talk. It felt wonderful to be back on the Quidditch field. He soared right around the stadium at full speed, racing Fred and George. "What's that funny clicking noise?" called Fred as they hurtled around the corner. Harry looked in the stands. Colin was sitting in one of the highest seats, his camera raised, taking picture after picture, the sound strangely magnified in the deserted stadium. Look, this way, Harry, this way, he cried shrilly. Who's that? Said Fred. No idea, Harry lied, putting on a spurt of speed that took him as far away as possible from Colin. What's going on? Said Wood, frowning as he skimmed through the air towards them. Why is that first year taking pictures? I don't like it. He could be a Slytherin spy trying to find out our new training program. He's in Gryffindor, said Harry quickly. And the Slytherins don't need a spy, Oliver, said George. What makes you say that? Said Wood testily. Because they're here in person, said George, pointing. Several people in green robes were walking onto the field, broomsticks in their hands. I don't believe it, Wood hissed in outrage. I booked the field for today. We'll see about this. Wood shot toward the ground, landing rather harder than he meant to in his anger, staggering slightly as he dismounted. Harry, Fred, and George followed. Flint, Wood bellowed at the Slytherin captain. This is our practice time. We got up specially. You can clear off now. Marcus Flint was even larger than Wood. He had a look of trollish cunning on his face as he replied, Plenty of room for all of us, Wood. Angelina, Alicia, and Katie had come over too. There were no girls on the Slytherin team, who stood shoulder to shoulder, facing the Gryffindors, leering to a man. But I booked the field, said Wood, positively spitting with rage. I booked it. Ah, said Flint, but I've got a specially signed note here from Professor Snape. I, Professor S. Snape, give the Slytherin team permission to practice today at the Quidditch field, owing to the need to train their new seeker. You've got a new seeker, said Wood, distracted. Where? And from behind the 6 large figures before them came a 7th smaller boy, smirking all over his pale pointed face. It was Draco Malfoy. Okay, we're going to stop there today. Join us tomorrow at 9 in the morning, and we'll continue on and see what Draco Malfoy brings to the Slytherin Quidditch team. Have a great day.